Olá, boa tarde a todos. Tá? Não. Olá, boa tarde. O meu nome é Rui Valera. Em nome da Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, queria agradecer a presença de todos para esta sessão do Meet the Author, que é a 7ª sessão. A convidada de hoje é a escritora Valeria Luiselli, que irá conversar com a Isabel Lucas, jornalista e escritora, que tem sido uma peça essencial neste projeto e que tem conduzido todas estas conversas com os escritores convidados. Espero que gostem da sessão. Now in English, my name is Rui Valera. On behalf of FLAD, the Luso-American Development Foundation, I would like to thank you all for being here today for the 7th session of the Meet the Author. Today our invited writer is Valeria Luiselli, who will speak with Isabel Lucas, a journalist and a writer who has been a key figure in this project. I hope you enjoy it. Valeria and Isabel, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Olá, boa tarde. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and it's a pleasure to have Valeria Luiselli here with us to talk about her work. We'll start with a reading.
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready to?
Maybe.
It's a part that she chose from Lost Children Archive. Her last novel that is published here in Portugal with the name of Deserto Sonoro. It's published by Bazarov. Bazarov is already closed, but there is a bookstore here in Lisbon that has her books. The name of the bookstore is Snob. And in the indie bookstore in Cascais with Francisca, that is there, they already have the book and is there just for if you want to buy. And there is also the other works of Valeria. So before I presented Valeria, I would like to, for all of us to be in the book. Just please. Start. And
all right.
Just if you want to say where is
sure.
For whom who wants
well,
to.
I'll start by saying hello first of all to everybody, and thank you for being here. I haven't read from this book in quite a while, and it's nice to be back here with it. This I don't know who here has read this book before, but just to give you a very quick overview. The book takes place in the USA while a family is driving from New York toward the US-Mexico border at the same time as there is diaspora of children that is arriving from the south to the border. This diaspora that arrives in this book is very much, of course, linked to the diaspora of children that has been arriving alone and undocumented in the USA for many, many years, but particularly since 2014, when the amount of children arriving in these conditions hit a very alarming number, and the US government reacted in a particularly inhumane way by creating something called a priority juvenile docket. I'm not going to get into legal speak, I promise, but just so you get a very quick sense, they created basically a backdoor way to deport as many children as possible, as fast as possible. I became very involved with that process in those years, basically translating children's testimonies and seeking lawyers who would work pro bono to defend them against the deportation order. Now, what I'm going to read to you is not from that part of the novel. What you're going to hear here is a family that is driving toward the border, who is really the family that is somehow the vehicle that allows us to see the U.S. through their eyes. They're a semi-foreign family. The father is American, but the mother is not, and her daughter is not. And they are moving through America, so it's like a sweeping, semi-foreign gaze of the land. And this is, I should say one more thing about this. My daughter, who is now 13, has heard me read this piece out loud in several occasions, especially while I was doing the book tour some years ago. And one day, she told someone this scene as if it had happened to her. And I told her, this did not happen to you. Do you think? Yes, it did. And so this did not happen. But there are some things about childhood memory that are certainly affected by fiction, and this is now something I think about a lot. Like, what do I write and what should I not write? All right, this fragment is called Nouns. Unhappiness grows slowly. It lingers inside you, silently, surreptitiously. You nourish it, feeding it scraps of yourself every day. It's the dog kept locked away in the back patio that will bite your hand off if you let it. Unhappiness takes time, but eventually it takes over completely. And then happiness, that word, arrives only sometimes and always like a sudden change of weather. It found us on our 10th day into the trip. I had called a number of motels in Graceland. None picked up except one. An old lady answered the phone, her voice like a distant fire crackling its way into my ear. Elvis Presley Boulevard Inn, at your service. I wondered if I was misunderstanding her when she said, yes, ma'am, plenty of room here and a new guitar pool. But we find exactly that, a motel all to ourselves, a motel with a swimming pool in the shape of an electric guitar, a motel in which instead of a bedside Bible, there is an Elvis Presley songbook, a motel with Elvis Presley everything everywhere, from the hand towels in the rooms to the salt and pepper shakers in the breakfast area. The boy and his father stay behind in the parking lot, rearranging the daily puzzle of our luggage, and the girl and I run up to the room to pee. We climb stairs, walk past eerie Elvis wax statues, hundreds of pictures and cartoons, an Elvis piñata, an all Elvis jukebox, small statuettes and yellowing t-shirts with a king's face nailed to the walls. By the time we make it into our room, we've understood, she in her own terms, that we're in some sort of temple or mausoleum. She's understood that this man is or was something important. She looks up at a photograph of a 30-something-year-old Elvis Presley hanging up on the wall between the two double beds in our new room and asks, is that Jesus fucking Christ, Mama? No, it's Elvis. And Mama, would you leave Papa and marry Elvis if you wanted? I try not to laugh, but I do. I say I'll consider it. But then I tell her, I would, except he's dead, my love. This poor young man is dead? He is. Like Johnny Cash is dead? Yeah. Like Janis Joplin is dead? Yeah. When the boy and my husband walk in with bags and suitcases, we all change into our swimsuits and run down to the guitar pool. We forget the towels and sunscreen, but then again, we're the type of family that has never taken a picnic blanket to a picnic or beach chairs to a beach. The girl, so cautious and philosophical in all her daily activities, becomes a wild beast in the water. She is possessed, delirious, beats on her own head and stomach like one of those post-hippie drummers who's been on LSD for too many decades. Her laughter thunders in her open mouth, milk teeth and perfect pink gums. She howls as she jumps into the pool, wriggles her way to freedom from our nervous clutches, discovers underwater that she does not know how to surface, so we fish her out and hold her tight and say, don't do that again. Be careful. You don't know how to swim yet. We don't know how to embrace her boundless enthusiasm or her volcanic bursts of vitality. It's hard for the rest of us, I think, to keep up with a dashing, reckless train of her happiness. Hard for me, at least, to let her be, when I keep on feeling that I have to save her from the world. I'm constantly imagining that she'll fall or get burned or be run over, or that she'll drown right now in this guitar-shaped swimming pool in Memphis, Tennessee, her face, in my mind, all blue and swollen. A friend of mine calls this the rescue distance, the constant equation operating in a parent's mind where time and distance are factored in to calculate whether it would be possible to save a child from danger. But at some point, like flipping a switch, we all stop calculating grim catastrophes and just let go. We tacitly agree to follow her instead of expecting her to stay back with us in our safe incapacity for life. We howl, ululate, roar. We plunge and resurface to float on our backs, looking up at the cloudless sky. We open our eyes wide inside the burning chlorine water. We emulate shitty fountain statues, spouting water from our mouths. And then, when the spell the girl has cast on us finally evaporates, we all sit by the edge of the pool, dangling our feet in the water and catching our breath. Later that night, lying in the dark of our motel bedroom, my husband tells the two children an Apache story about how Apaches earned their war names. We listen to him, silent. His voice rises and whirls around the room, carried across the thick, hot air that the ceiling fan stirs, its cheap veneer blades squeaking a bit. We lie face up, trying to catch a breeze, except the girl. She lies on her tummy and sucks her thumb, her suck rhythm in syncopation with the cyclical rattle of paddles bubbling in the ceiling fan. The boy waits for his father to finish the story and then says, if she were an Apache, her war name would be Loud Thumb. Me, the girl asks, unplugging her thumb from her mouth and raising her head in the dark, not convinced, but always proud to be talked about. Yeah, Loud Thumb or Suck Thumb. No. My war name would be Grace, Land Memphis, Tennessee. Or Guitar Swimming Pool, either or. Those are not Apache names, right, Pa? No, they're not, my husband confirms. Guitar Swimming Pool is not an Apache name. Well then, I want to be Grace, Land Memphis, she says. It's Graceland, Memphis, you moron, the boy informs her from the heights of his now 10-year-old superiority. Fine then, so just Memphis. She says this with the authoritative assurance of bureaucrats closing their plastic windows, taking no more requests, no more complaints, and then plugs her thumb right back into her mouth. We know this side of her. When she's made up her stubborn little mind, there's no way to convince her otherwise, so we defer, respect her resolve, and say no more. What about you? I asked the boy. Me? He would be Swift Feather, his father immediately suggests. Yeah, that's right, Swift Feather. And Ma, who's she? He asks. My husband takes his time to think about it and finally says she would be Lucky Arrow. I like the name, and I smile in acknowledgement or in gratitude. I smile at him for the first time in days, maybe weeks, but he can't see me smile because the room is dark and his eyes are probably closed anyway. Then I ask him, and you? What would your war name be? The girl chimes in without taking her thumb out of her mouth, lisping, feathing, and thumbing her words. Pa, he's the Elvis, or the Jesus fucking Christ, either or. My husband and I laugh, and the boy reprimands her. You're gonna go to hell if you keep on saying that. He probably chastises her more because of our praising laughter than because of the content of her statement. She certainly does not know why she should be censored. Then, taking her thumb out of her mouth, she says, who's your favorite Apache, Pa, from history? Geronimo? No, my favorite is Chief Cochise. Then you get to be Papa Cochise, she says, like she's handing him a gift. Papa Cochise, my husband whispers back. And softly, slowly, we fall asleep, embracing these new names. The ceiling fan slicing the thick air in the room, thinning it. I fall asleep at the same time as the three of them, maybe for the first time in years, and as I do, I cling to these four certainties. Swift Feather, Papa Cochise, Lucky Arrow, Memphis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that we are all in the tone of the novel, I will tell you some few information about Valeria Luiselli, and after that we start our conversation about her work. In an interview with the Público newspaper in March 2021, Valeria Luiselli said that fiction is a way to reach a deeper truth. It was shortly after the publication in Portugal of Lost Children Archive, in Portuguese, Deserto Sonoro. It is the latest novel by this multi-award-winning writer and essayist, a graduate in dance and comparative literature, an explorer of multiple arts: literature, music, dance, performance. What more?
Basta.
She's Mexican, Italian, and American since last September. Valeria Luiselli was born in Mexico City in 1983. Daughter of a diplomat, she lived in North Korea, South Africa, India, Spain, Costa Rica, and returned to Mexico and went then to United States, where she has a PhD in dance. She lived in New York for 15 years and currently settled in Cambridge near Boston, where she teaches writing at Harvard University. Author of essays, short stories, she published 5 books: the volume of essays Sidewalks, Faces on the Ground, The Story of My Teeth, and Tell Me How It Ends, an essay in 40 questions that in some ways give originated this book, and at least Lost Children Archive, where in a journey that crosses the U.S. From East New York to the South, she explores the theme of children crossing the Mexican border illegally, and I guess, as you said one day, is a cry of rage against the immigration crisis. Valeria, welcome. And just to begin, what the word border suggests to you?
Well, first, I just want to say a tiny thing about my biographical data. One that I found wonderful, but it's not true, is that I lived in North Korea. Well, I didn't find that so wonderful.
No, it's Seoul,
it's
South Korea.
But
yes.
The other one is that I have a PhD in dance.
You
and
don't?
I love, of course I don't, but I would love to.
It's a false
so
memory, maybe. I don't know
where you got it
get
from,
this.
but let's not change it. I think it's a great rumor.
It's great. Okay.
It's a great rumor. The border. It's I think strange how all of us so quickly adapt to rather absurd things, right? So 200 years ago or less, between the Mexico and the U.S. was nothing, no kind of border of any type. And after what the Americans called the Mexican-American War, but the Mexicans call a little bit more precisely the American intervention, the two governments sat in Washington and Mexico City and decided upon the new limits of the two countries. And they put together this commission, which seems like something from a Kafka story, called the Commission for Friendship and Limits. What a strange thing. And so they put together this commission, and the commission, this binational commission, devoted itself for years to walking the now borderlands, putting little mountains of stones to mark the new limits that the two countries would have. These new limits were ones in which Mexico had lost what is now Arizona, New Mexico, California, part of Oklahoma. I don't know if you've ever seen those old maps, but basically half of the territory of the United States used to belong to Mexico. And before that, it didn't belong to anyone but the people that actually lived there. There were no... Mexico also usurped that through the Spanish crown, had also usurped that land. But anyway, the Commission of Friendship and Limits put together these little mounds of rock and decided, okay, this is the limit of these two countries. Of course, then the mounds of rock with every rainstorm dissolved. And so then they started putting these little obelisks made of I'm failing to remember the word marble. But people really liked the marble obelisk, so they started stealing them. So then they started caging the obelisk. So to this day, there are still some caged obelisks, and there's some wonderful images of men climbing high on mountains trying to fit an obelisk in between rocks. So that is a border. The most absurd commission for friendship and limits, but one kind of consensuous lie that we then take so seriously that we invent methods of surveillance technology and prisons to make sure that the people who cross it go to jail if they do, or branches of governments that police communities to make sure that they are thrown to the other side of the border if they cross it. So it's like this collective hysteria around something that is just consented to be real, but really is not so, right? And countries are not that old, but yet we believe in them like these very, very immobile things. But yet, in some generations, we will not be here when that happens. The form of political organization will probably be different, no? In 200, 300 years from now. But while we live in a moment in time, we accept kind of blandly and unquestioningly the things as they are, right?
Mm-hmm. You started this novel in 2014, I guess, with when you heard some news about the border and the crisis of immigration. It passed 9 years since. What are the news? Because now there is a kind of silence about that border. What do you know about what is happening?
Yeah, one of the big differences between Democrats in power and Republicans in power is that Republicans, and especially the last administration, like to make public the horrible things that they do, and the Democrats like to hide the horrible things that they do, particularly with respect to immigration. But something has changed, I think, very brutally over the past, I would say, 8 years. So something that kind of started to just boil during the Obama administration really reached a point of difficult return during the Trump administration, and that is that the immigration or the people who immigrate without documents were absorbed into the prison industrial complex of the United States. So some of you might know, some of you might not, I'm not sure, that the US is one of the few democratic countries that has a prison system that is lucrative, that it's a private industry. And basically 2 or 3 companies own most of the prisons, Core Civic, Geo Group. So there's a great incentive to incarcerate people. And just as black communities and indigenous communities, native communities are primarily targeted in terms of feeding the monster of the prison complex, undocumented communities are now a very easy target of sort of bodies that feed the monster of also jails that are not called jails, and many don't even conceive them as jails, but are detention centers. But the detention centers are owned by the same groups that own the prisons. And the particularly sinister part of this, although it's all quite sinister, is that children, undocumented children who used to be placed into shelters while awaiting to find a family member that was going to receive them, now stay in those so-called shelters for months and months or maybe years. And those shelters have become prison spaces. Basically, the prison industrial complex has found a way to turn a temporary relief space into a lucrative space where children are detained. And children produce, a child incarcerated produces more revenue than an adult, so there's a particular incentive to incarcerate children. And even though, even if it's 3-4 months, if you think about it, how can it be legal that a child who has not committed a crime, because migrating without documents is not a criminal act, it's something called an administrative fault. How is it possible to justify that this person is now criminalized and put inside a jail, and that someone, a CEO, is making a lot of money? I worked in a detention center for a period of time, teaching creative writing to a group of girls. And I'm now writing a book about this finally, so researching more about this particular place where I worked. And I found just that in 2016, when the panorama started changing, the CEO of that particular place, that detention center, made a salary of about $60,000, $70,000 a year, which is not, it's a good salary, but now he has a salary of $500,000 a year. Explain that, you know, what is happening. And basically the way that the circuit, sorry, I'm going really into this. If you're getting bored with the details, I don't know, yawn or something, but basically the way that this is paid for is people pay taxes, those go into Congress, congressional appropriations, people lobby, and it is decided in that congressional appropriation who gets what part of the pie. This is kind of very roughly put. And the amount of money that has been going in the past 5 or 6 years to ICE, Homeland Security, that then pay external contractors such as these companies, has risen enormously, right? So there's something very simple that could change, that would really get rid of this, which is to make it illegal for a prison to be lucrative. It's not that hard. Most countries have prisons that are not private, but yet we seem far away from that still.
Mm-hmm. And the book that you are writing is a fiction or an essay?
I'm writing an essay about the prison industrial complex and detention centers in particular.
And this book also starts with an essay. Tell me how it ends. Just tell us the connection between both, between that book that is a book based on a real experience and this fiction that is also starts with the facts and the connection between both.
Yeah.
One give you the knowledge to the fiction.
Yeah, it was a weird itinerary kind of. I had started to write this novel without really knowing that I was writing it while I was crossing the U.S. by land on a road trip, just taking notes of what I saw, of moments, a diner in Oklahoma, people swimming in a lake in Tennessee. And I didn't know quite yet that I was writing this, but it was beginning. Something was starting to fizzle there. And at the same time as we were in that journey, the immigration crisis erupted at the border, and I started following the news very obsessively, trying to understand what was happening. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. How was it possible that there were so many children alone, undocumented? No one was really finding a way to make sure that the children not only arrived safely, but that found their families quickly and got some form of legal support. A lot of them were asking for asylum. Asking for asylum is a legal thing, etc. So I was very much obsessed with the situation, or concerned. So when I, after the summer, I returned to New York and I became very involved with that crisis as a volunteer translator of cases. And for a while, I would kind of bring what I had heard that day in court into the space, into the territory of the novel. I would kind of fictionalize it, dump it on the novel, so to speak. And I did that for a few months until I realized that I wasn't doing any justice to the situation, first of all, by trying to fictionalize it as it was happening. Like fiction has a different rhythm. No, it's of course not impossible to write fiction about the present reality, but trying to keep up with reality in a certain way is difficult for fiction, or at least for the kind of fiction that I'm interested in. And I also wasn't doing any justice to the novel by trying to turn it into a vehicle for political denunciation or as a means to an end, right? The novel was turning into something a little bit annoying, you know, that was trying to teach something or say something. And so I stopped writing the novel completely, and I wrote Tell Me How It Ends, which is a very short, very to the point essay that is constructed around 40 questions that they ask children in immigration courts. And so it is at the same time an X-ray of the American immigration system and a story about how this particular diaspora began. And once I wrote that essay, I had the freedom again to return to the novel and not think of the novel as this means to an end, but fiction, right? And I conceive as fiction, and particularly novels, as much more the way that André Gide used to think of novels, as a slice of life. You know, you take life and you slice it somehow. What you find in that slice is people getting divorced, people sucking their thumbs, people fighting, people making love, people listening to the news, people discussing issues, not in that order all necessarily, right? But the novel is much more that, you know, it's not a novel about immigration. It's a novel with a family. It's a novel with divorce, with disloyalty, with anger, with nostalgia, and it's not a political vehicle of any sort.
You talk about that slice of life that fiction means to you. In that slice of life, we have lots of digressions in the landscape, but also in the heads of the characters here, in the subjects and all of that. How did you manage those things? Because you cross lots of borders. You talk about music. You talk about photos, pictures. We talk about Appalachians. We talk about the history of both countries. How do you make those and the day life also?
Well, more than how do I manage, it's like how do I not manage to be constantly distracted, or how do I manage to stay out focus? The way I write is very much the way that I've learned how to write over the years is not trying to kind of isolate myself against my circumstances, which is basically I've been a mother my entire adult life, like since I was 24, and kind of always on the move and often documenting moments of political crisis. And so the only way I've learned how to write is allowing for distraction, digression, external noise, so to speak, to come in and be part of the party. You know, like it's. I think of my novels as like very porous entities where a lot of different winds come in, and I have tried to be a different kind of novelist before. You know,
such as,
for example, in the pandemic, I realized, you know, in the pandemic we were all sort of throwing things out the window, you know? And metaphorically speaking. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to pen a novel under a different name about like vampires in Mexico City and New York, like some sexy saga, and just make a lot of money with it. It's like very bad taste, I know, but I've always liked vampire stories. It's my tacky side, you know. And I sat down and I wrote like chapter 1, Mexico City, and then nothing, like nothing. And I just could never write. I've never been able to write a novel beginning with chapter 1. You know, I've just, the way that the way I know how to write is like just finding strings between very disconnected islands, and that takes me time. So those digressions are islands that grew on their own and like archipelagos that then are connected by, I don't know, like the metaphor is not working, but a little boat that traverses them.
And what happened to that vampire story?
Oh, it never got written. But one day I'm going to write it. But you won't know because it won't be under my name.
You mentioned one of the things that is very strong here is the question of testimony, being a testimony. And you write about that, also bring us another question, that is what to tell or not to tell, what we should tell and what we shouldn't tell, ethically speaking. And you mentioned Susan Sontag about in that thoughts. How was that your thoughts about this when you are telling this story? What did you not tell because you think it's not supposed to?
Yeah. So this is being streamed by YouTube, right? This talk?
I don't know. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
so others think I'm not going to say that.
No, it's just us here.
Well, I'm not gonna go into detail because YouTube, thank you. But you know, in stories of migration, there's always so much inventiveness as well in how a migration journey is made possible. Like sometimes, I know, for example, the figure of the coyote is often very demonized, and often rightly so, because a lot of coyotes who take people across the border are in fact not necessarily always decent people or honest people, but a lot of them are, and it's their job, and they get paid. And they have incredibly inventive ways to get people across. And I wish I could tell you, but I can't, because if it's too public, then it's too public, and then you know, then they won't be able to do that anymore. So I've always wanted to write about like the ideas that people have to cross a border, but it's just something that I unfortunately always have to keep to myself. But there's other things too, you know. I very much respect the work that journalists do in covering everything they cover, especially in a country like Mexico, where it's so dangerous to be a journalist. But journalism cannot, and it's not its duty, cannot really plunge us into sort of deeper layers of our understanding and emotional understanding of another person's experience. Some great journalism, of course, does that. But the kind of journalism that we read kind of quickly in the paper doesn't do that, and it doesn't have to. No, it informs us. It doesn't form us. And so when I write things that also journalists are covering, like a migration crisis, I am very careful to not reproduce the kind of, for example, the kind of violence on the page that journalism often does, because it's informing, or to victimize the people involved by only telling the story of their tragedy. Rather, I'm very interested in like following the thread that allows us to see the mischievous quality of a person who is in a migration story, or the inventiveness, or the courage, or the resilience, which are usually always undermined by the kind of journalism that covers migration, right? And I think that literature is capable of that. Fiction is capable of that.
Is that deeper truth that you mentioned?
I think that is the deeper truth in the sense that it gives us access to something that we share with everyone else. No? And then empathy is not even like something that we have to strive for. It's just it's just so obvious. So it's just so much easier to understand another when we get access to not to information, but to spirit, you know. Forgive me for the rather, religious undertone. I'm not religious, but I just saw the Pope in Rome. Really, this is true. A few days ago, they invited us to the Vatican, a few like writers, well, not a few, like 100 writers and painters to talk to the Pope. who delivered. I've never been religious. Now I'm converting to panchismo. He gave the most extraordinary speech on the relationship between the arts and spirituality, I guess, right? But not necessarily in a religious way. I do think that literature reaches into our spirit in a way that music does, painting for some people, and not a lot of other things, you know.
There is this is a metaphoric thing that is the way that this couple they are trying to capture the echoes, the sounds of the world. First of all, the sounds of New York, and then in that project that crosses America through West, trying to capture the sounds of the world, the sounds of Appalachians. There is a kind of spirit, kind of
En
português, religiosidade.
no, está muy difícil. ¿Y en español? Religiosidad.
Sí.
Religiosity. I don't know.
Do you believe in that? That kind of echoes of the world take us to a place that it's not a real place, but a place of senses, of that word sounds. What that
Yeah, I understand.
echoes.
I think we're getting into very abstract territory here, which is fine by me. But I think, you know, there is something in sound in particular that I am very interested in, and I started exploring in this book, and now I am exploring in a much more active way with a couple of friends, collaborators with whom I'm doing something similar to what the protagonists in the novel. So I'm kind of like copying this. I mean, not me so much, because what happened was that I met someone through a friend who does exactly what one of the characters in the novel here does. Basically, he's been recording sounds for many years and composes with them. And now, together, we're working on a project together, which is a 24-hour sound piece about the history of violence and resistance in the US-Mexico borderlands. And it's 24 hours because, not just because we want to make it long, but because if you drive from Tijuana, San Diego, in a relative straight line on the US side, all the way to Brownsville, Matamoros, the end of Texas, the wetlands, and into the Gulf of Mexico, that is roughly 24 hours. So the idea is that this piece is a kind of sound drive that anyone crazy enough to want to do it can do while listening to, I mean, maybe not in 24 hours straight, amphetamines, but in pieces, and that you can listen to space as you drive it, but to layers of space that have also since disappeared. So we have a lot of archival recordings retrieved from archive, but then a lot of field recordings where we record rainfall or coyotes howling, not human, but animal coyotes, or border patrol that comes and questions us about things. Or recently, we just came back actually right now from a recording trip to a small town in Texas called San Ignacio, where we gave a workshop to children of the community, and there was a beautiful moment, for example, where the children started interviewing the river, the Rio Bravo, the Rio Grande, and we were just standing in front of the river recording, and the kids started asking questions like, "Why are you so green, the river? And why are you so polluted? And why do you kill so many people?" And they had this amazing exchange with the river, and then all of a sudden, out of the bushes, arrived 2 border patrols on horseback. There's not a lot of border patrol on horseback, but apparently in Texas there are. And the kids were a little bit alarmed at first, but then immediately one girl who had the recorder, we were doing this game of interviewing the river with a recorder, and she was kind of feisty, and when he approached us, probably to ask us the typical questions that Border Patrol would ask, she she started interviewing him. She said, "Hey, what do you do? And why are you here? And what is your horse's name?" And I mean, so we're recording kind of everything that we can, and hoping that it's a way to everybody talks about the border. Everybody has so many ideas, but not everybody listens to the border. So the idea is to be able to really listen to the voices of the people and of non-human things that make up the borderlands.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the word archive is the title of the novel in English. We started with one word, border. Now I would like you to talk a little bit about this. This another word that is archive. You explore the word in the novel. Can you take us to that?
Yeah, archive. I mean, the word is very academic, right?
It is.
And it also...
bureaucratic also.
Bureaucratic, and it also encapsulates a lot of hierarchy, right? What makes it to the archive makes it to official history, basically, right? Or at least to the possibility of becoming history. And everything that doesn't make it to archive doesn't become history or doesn't form part of narrative. And so what I think I was trying to think about during writing Lost Children Archive was how do I build a kind of, not a counter archive, that's a little pretentious, but more like a more heterogeneous archive that puts together things that maybe don't normally go together, and in a way forms new constellations of meaning by doing so. So what happens if you take a box and in it you put a file full of migrant death reports in Arizona, together with Pedro Páramo, the most brilliant novel written in the 20th century by a Mexican writer called Juan Rulfo, but not the most brilliant novel by him or by the most brilliant novel, period, in case that wasn't clear. And in that same box, you put in some Polaroids of Arizona, or maybe Ezra Pound's cantos. What happens when you start mixing things that don't normally mix, right? And how do they re-signify? So this whole book is a kind of re-signifying bits and pieces of things that tell stories about children migrating alone in history, about the violence of the United States government with the original inhabitants of the land, with the repeated cycle of violence in that way, so forms of deportation, forms of deportation into reservations, forms of deportation into prisons, basically forms of systematic exclusion and erasure of a kind of collective archive. Right?
Mm-hmm. You consider yourself, and you are an activist of this kind of themes. How do you get to separate the things, being an activist and being a fictional writer? Do you separate things, or they are connected?
I don't. I mean, I think I haven't been involved in what might be called activism, in the sense that I actively participated in processes like translation in court, or but I don't see myself so much as an activist as I do as a writer, you know. And I don't see my writing as a form of activism. I'd like to think that my writing activates people. Particularly, I think that my nonfiction writing, I do think of it maybe more instrumentally than my fiction, as something that hopefully will stir others. And I know to a degree that book, Tell Me How It Ends, has been a book that has stirred younger people. In the US, it's a book that's been read very widely in colleges and all around the US, where I've had the opportunity to travel and speak to very different communities about it. But other than that, I don't think of my work as activism. You know, like what really is active? I mean, right now activism is mostly on Twitter, no, and people saying what they think. I'm very glad. But I don't know. I mean, of course, no. I'm being unserious. There's a lot of very important activism where people put their bodies in front of forces of power to defend water, to defend land from being taken over by a mining company. That is, I think, the most extraordinary activism of our day. And unfortunately, those activists are the ones that are most consistently targeted by governments in Mexico and in the US and across the Americas. I'm not sure to what degree that's an ongoing problem in Europe. I would be very interested in knowing. But that is, I think, I mean, if that's an activist, I'm not. I'm a writer. I sit on my desk and think. Or maybe I go record things in the border, but that's it, you know.
But that rage that was supposedly in the origin of these books, that rage is a kind of political feeling and
yeah, no, definitely. And I do think that, you know, rage without time to somehow metabolize it is a kind of outrage. And rage with time is maybe sense of purpose. And what I do think that I try to hold on to is the rage that maybe is ignited in me by a particular event or series of events, and capitalizing on that rage enough to alchemize it into a sense of purpose that doesn't stray, right? That doesn't stray from what I think is just, what I think is right.
You mentioned lots of writers here. It's kind of archive of influences, and you are talking about Rio Bravo, and I remember immediately of Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy is one of the writers here in this book. You are also in that territory, fictional territory. How is your relation with this, the McCarthy's literature?
I really love his writing. As you guys know, he passed away, I think, two or 3 weeks ago, no?
Yes.
I think he was one of the greatest living writers, no? Maybe up there with Coetzee, J.M. Coetzee and Anne Carson. Those are, I think, of our day, or Svetlana Alexeyevich. In our day, the kind of lighthouses that I see that are always kind of lighting our way. And McCarthy particularly was a voice of the borderlands. No? He would have not been a writer without Rulfo, for example. And he says so himself. Like he was a devout reader of Juan Rulfo, and understood, I think, the violence in the border like no one else has before. But also the beauty of the borderland.
Yes, yes. I was thinking about the language, because you here in the book you talk about a mother language. You have two mother languages, I guess, at least. You write this novel. It was your first novel written in English, I guess, only in English. When we thought of the title, about the title, Lost Children Archive in Spanish is Desierto Sonoro.
Sí.
Sí. How was that?
What the hell happened?
Yes.
So all my titles are a mess. Like none of them. So my first book I wrote in Spanish called Papeles Falsos. In English, it's Sidewalks.
You choose both.
It's my fault, all of it. I choose both of them, yeah. Then the second book I wrote was called Los Ingrávidos, a very beautiful word in Spanish that means someone without weight, without gravity. But the weightless ones in English just sounded like a bad translation. Also, I pronounced it like waitlist. Like no one could ever understand me when I said waitlist, you see. And so it became Faces in the Crowd, after a poem by Ezra Pound. Rostos na Multidão in Portuguese. Then I have one book that is seamlessly translated, The Story of My Teeth, La Historia de Mis Dientes, which is not a memoir, in case anyone wonders. And then this mess, Desierto Sonoro, Lost Children Archive, Tell Me How It Ends, Los Niños Perdidos. What happened was, I wrote Tell Me How It Ends first, or that was the first thing that was finished and published. That is the essay in 40 questions. Then I sent it to my translators, not my translators, sorry. I sent it to my publishers in Mexico saying, guys, I wrote this essay in English. I would really like to publish it in Spanish. let's find a journal or something in Mexico. So they read it and they said, no, we'd like to publish it as a book, small book. And I said, okay, strange, but fine, we can think about it. When I go to Mexico, we'll talk about the translation process, who can translate it. It would be my first book translated into my own language, so that's going to be weird. Okay, so we had a meeting, which in the case of my publishers in Mexico means cantina mezcal. So by the fourth mezcal, they had convinced me that I was a traitor to my mother, to the Virgen de Guadalupe, to everything, everyone, because I had written this book in the language of the empire. And so I ended up signing a napkin saying that I would always self-translate as a penitence back into Spanish whatever I had written in the language of the empire. And so I translated...
Are you still writing in the language of the empire?
Which empire? The kind of. So I wrote. So when I rewrote it in Spanish, I realized that only Spanish speakers are going to get this. The title in Spanish was un albur, un autoalbur. Basically, it would have been Dime cómo acaba Valeria Luiselli. Todo mal, right? For those of you who don't understand, learn Spanish. I'm sure in Portuguese it would be similar. In English, learn Spanish. And so it was not doable. And so I just took the title of the novel that I was working on, and I said, I'll give the English title to the Spanish. And so it became Los Niños Perdidos, the essay. And so then by the time the novel was finished in Spanish, it couldn't have the same title as the essay, or it would have been Los Niños Perdidos, the essay, Archivo de los Niños Perdidos, the novel. It was a nightmare for booksellers, so anyway. So unfortunately, I collectivized the decision of what should we call this novel between friends and editors, and it was 2 months of opinions. One should never ask anybody what they think the title should be. It's the word, or it's like your child, you know? Should I call him Ignacio or Juan? No, like don't, ever. But I have a very brilliant friend who's a fantastic writer and is great at giving titles to books that are not hers, but also to hers, Samantha Schweblin.
Yes.
And she was the one who suggested Desierto Sonoro in Spanish, which is a beautiful, I like it better than Lost Children Archive. It has a double meaning that also would be impossible in English. Un desierto sonoro is a sonorous desert, but it means in Spanish both a desert full of sound, but also a space devoid of sound. So that duplicity I found very important for the book. Mm-hmm. So that's the story of the titles. And I don't know what's going to happen next. I think my next books I'm going to really make an effort to try and keep the same title.
But the writing in English, it was a decision, or it was simply, it happened naturally?
It's a decision that takes me 5 years or so, because I usually take many years of making notes in both languages until one day I sit down and one of the languages just carries me better than the other. And
there is a music of the language.
There's something, it's about rhythm. And rhythm, finally, in terms of writing, not in terms of music, but in terms of writing, comes from syntax, right? Mm-hmm. So rhythm is a product of syntax, of where you choose to put pauses, where you locate the verb in a clause, and sometimes rhythm works, and sometimes it doesn't. When it does, you have to catch it and write it, because it's very rare to catch it. And so whenever that happens in one language, I take that one.
Mm-hmm. As we are talking about words, I know you told me that you wrote an essay about the word saudade, what that means. It was one of your first essays. What took you to that word and want to explore what does it mean?
I wrote it many years ago, so I think my answer won't be too precise. I was 22 or 23 years old when I wrote that essay. It's part of my first collection of essays, Papeles Falsos, Sidewalks. I think I was trying to explore constellation of words like nostalgia, melancholy, homesickness, and saudade among them, and trying to kind of understand what the feeling, what human beings experience in never being fully at home or always being somewhat foreign, both in a real sense of maybe not being in your motherland, but also a kind of strangeness to the world and a constant nostalgia for a kind of primal home. So it's an essay about that, in which I arrived eventually at saudade as maybe one of the most precise words to describe what I was trying to do. But yeah, it's about Lisbon too, but I'd never come to Lisbon until now. So there's a lot of Rua dos Douradores, and I was using maps. There was no Google Maps yet, so I wasn't cheating. I wasn't like, it's not cheating really, but I wasn't doing the yellow man thing. I was just looking at a map and seeing, okay, where did Fernando Pessoa walk these streets? Was it this one or that?
And this book is also full of maps. Maps are
indeed.
You took us to lots of maps, and you took us also to a question that I guess it's crucial here. That is a kind of end of a dream, end of a love dream, the couple, the end of a love affair, and a kind of crisis of a dream, of American dream. What does that mean? What does that mean now in 2023?
The crisis or the end of the American dream?
The end of the American dream, if there is an end.
We would have to ask people of an older generation than me who are American when they think the American dream died as an idea, really, as a sentiment. My feeling is that the hope in or the belief in a nation that was great. Oh God, that word. You can't use that word anymore. Shit. You see? I think it extinguished itself longer ago. I think that there is you cannot live in the United States and not be in constant worry and sometimes rage of what it takes for some people to be free or have good lives, or the cost of the cost elsewhere, for the middle class comforts, or not only middle class and upwards of the American, by the way, and of the European society as well, right? So it's hard to not become cynical. I think it's important not to become cynical. I think it's important to find a place of criticism that still has a sense of hope, right? Otherwise, it's kind of hard to. I don't think we should end the conversation here, though.
No.
I think we should. The other part of your question was about divorce, so that's even worse. Or not,
yes.
maybe not worse. Maybe not worse.
I would like to finish with this kind of archive. I guess it's very inspiring. The archive of your references, literary references, and I would like you to talk about some of those. We have here Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf. We have also John Conrad. We have Joseph Conrad, T.S. Eliot. We have Marcel Schwab. Is a constellation here, a literary constellation. Juan Rulfo, of course, is here also. Ezra Pound, Galloway, Augusto Monterroso. This is a kind of family, a writing family.
I really like what the great Spanish writer Quevedo used to say about books. I won't be able to remember the exact lines. Let me see. En la paz de estos desiertos, con pocos pero doctos libros juntos, vivo en conversación con los difuntos y escucho con mis ojos a los muertos. That was it. So I don't think I will be able to translate this. But the image is that of a person sort of in a tower in La Paz de los Desiertos. He was actually in a tower physically, and talks about how he listens to the dead with his eyes, basically. Books as these kinds of ghostly companions that populate our solitude, right? And I know that I know that we have really normalized the existence of this little object, no? That we see a book and we don't necessarily get really excited every time we see a book. But really, if you think about it a little bit, it's kind of fantastic because it's a very sort of small and portable thing, and you open it, and you are immediately in touch with the mind of another person who may have died centuries ago or may still be alive, but your mind is traveling through the mind of that other person and doing its own magical wonders to recreate the images, the feelings that are kind of laid out on that map. No? And it's the maximum, one of the most, or maximum acts of communication and imagination. So why am I talking about this? Because you asked me about this family.
This family.
Yeah. Oh, it's in English? Oh, thank you. So, retirado en la paz de estos desiertos con pocos pero doctos libros juntos, vivo en conversación con los difuntos y escucho con mis ojos a los muertos. Retired to these deserts and at peace, and with but few, though learned, books beside, I live conversing now with the deceased, and listen with mine eyes to those who died. It's a good translation. Thank you. Gracias.
So I have lots of questions here, but we have to pass to the audience. Now questions to Valeria, please.
First is, because I'm very curious, I'm a photographer. How did you work on the pictures in Lost Children Archive and the story? Like, are those pictures inspired by the story? Do they come before? How was that communication between the pictures and the...
You want me to reveal my secrets?
Yes.
My kitchen.
Yes. And the second question is about the TIA.
Oh,
yeah.
The TIA.
How is it going today?
Oh, okay.
Like, has it expanded? Or
Yeah, unfortunately, the TIA doesn't exist as such anymore because I have since left the university, and it didn't continue when the generation of kids that was there graduated. But the good thing is that a lot of the kids that integrated the TIA, of the students at least that I was a teacher of, became immigration lawyers, journalists that cover immigration, and I get emails from them very often, or not very often, but often for a 20-something-year-old, you know, saying, "Hey, Prof, I'm now living in Los Angeles and I'm doing this," or "Hey, I'm writing for the Boston Globe about this," and so that's really encouraging. That this is about. She's asking a question about that book, Tell Me How It Ends, where I had a group of students whom I taught a course on immigration, whom a lot of them were first very resistant to, not very, but they naturally resistant, and asking reasonable questions like why should the U.S. be in charge of caring for foreign people when we already have so many problems ourselves, right? It's a very common question, and one that one needs to be able to answer well. No? So it was a course devoted to answering questions like that, and from that course was born a very active group of students, or I would say activist group of students who really took into their hands forming a much stronger sense of community with recently arrived teenagers just a few years younger than them in their community in Long Island. And about the pictures, I have been working with Polaroid pictures for some years now, as almost a way of just documenting moments of a process that later help me as almost, like Post-its almost, right? They help me return to specific moments. They kind of hold a place. And with Lost Children Archive, I did a first series of Polaroids that I did without knowing that they would be part of, because I didn't know I was yet writing that novel. But then I took several other trips in which the photos are more intentional, where I was looking for specific things because they were going to serve. So it was a little bit of both, basically, together. And some of the Polaroids are taken by me, and some are indeed taken by my children and stepchildren. Yeah.
I'm curious, in the Lost Children book, why you've chosen not to give the children names. Why the girl and why the boy?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think I always answer different things. There are no names, except in the scene they give them each other names, and from then on the kids use that given name among them or between them. But they're also not very precise descriptions of physical appearance of characters, and that's a very intentional thing as well. Because I think that I'd like for the readers to make that effort and to have that space of freedom in engaging. I mean, there's a lot of detail in perhaps a movement or a conversation, but never, or very late into the book, some indications of how these characters might look. I think it's really important to give that space and not over-determine, or it's important for me to give that space, because I don't necessarily ask that of books as a reader, but it's important for me to give that kind of space, because I like a kind of writing that engages the reader very early on with them having to put in these kinds of details. Yeah.
The husband doesn't have a name either.
No, he's just a husband, and then eventually Papa Cochise.
What are their ethnic backgrounds?
Well, that's really up to you to decide. Although there is enough information in the book that you can probably make an informed decision. Except now there's going to be a movie, so all my efforts are going to go to hell, because there has to be a determination there. The director's going to have to choose. Yeah.
So I've only read one of your books, so maybe this is not a very smart question, but do you always write in the first-person point of view? And if so, does that came naturally to you, or was it more of a decision, a practice? I'd like to know more. And how do you distinguish your own subjectivity from, the character that you're writing first person?
Did you read Rosse's Na Multidão, or no, this one?
It's Lost
Children Archive.
Yeah.
Well, there is, within Lost Children Archive, there's one big thread that is written in the third person, and that's the elegies. And that's the first time I wrote in the third person. And I thought I was going to be incapable of it, but actually, once I started, I found it a very, not easy, it's never easy to write, but I found it a very almost pleasurable water to navigate. There was something that flowed more swiftly than when I write in the first. But then every time I've written in the first person, I mean, some of my narrators are female, 30s, so kind of confusable with me. But I've also written from the point of view of a guy who sells teeth for a living, or an auctioneer. And I've also written in the point of view of a 10-year-old child. So I don't think that, I think I don't feel like I'm too close in a biographical sense. but of course one does very much become that voice when you're working on it, no? Or at least the way that I was able to write, particularly from the point of view of a kid, I had to let that character grow inside me by also writing about him through the female narrator. And once he was very real in my head and had like a very real presence, almost I felt kind of inhabited by him, then I was able to kind of inhabit his consciousness easy and not try to write generically from the point of view of a 10-year-old, which is unfortunately, I think a lot of what sometimes literature does, no? Like there's generic children. It's even worse in movies. You know, there's like generic children always. It's hard. I mean, and it's wonderful when you find a movie or a show where a child is when their spirit is particularized, no? And it's not just a cute thing. But yeah.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much. Would you, although this might be limitative, but would you characterize Lost Children Archive as a road narrative?
As a what narrative?
A road
Oh,
narrative.
as in road, yeah. Yeah, it is. It's like an anti-road trip, but it's a road trip or a road novel.
Is it anti, really? Because in the end, you know, there's a certain kind of hope, a certain reconstruction, right? So
Yeah.
and we know that American, particularly, of course, I'm talking about American road narratives as iconic of the United States, although they give us mixed feelings, right, in the sense that they are looking for something, but in the end they don't find it. In your work, it seems to me that they do find something, even if it is a kind of, you know, break or not such a positive kind of thing, but there's certain positivity there.
Yeah, I think it is very much a road novel, but it's crossed by the kind of Latin American / French form of voyage, which has to do with, yes, I mean, geographically the elegies move from south to north, but in a deeper sense, it's like a descent into hell, right? Which is very much sort of the journeying story in the Latin tradition. Latin as in Latin Europe and then exported to Latin America. But the Dantean descent or the Rulfian descent is the kind of movement that this novel tells. So it's like if you cross an American road trip novel with a Latin American journey novel.
Okay, thank you so much.
There's this moment where you talk about the difference between being a sound documentalist and a documentarist. So you were talking about the new audio project you're developing. And I was wondering, was this a discussion that you had with someone, this difference? And what are you being on that new project? Documentalist or?
I always regret this because I don't remember exactly which one's which anymore. I know there's two, documentarian and documentalist, or documentarist, right? But no, it was something that the boy invented, or the boy's voice invented. And I do remember that one of them, okay, I think I will remember because they rhyme. So documentarist is like an alchemist, right? And a documentarian is like a librarian. I think that's what the child explains. So if that means anything, it means that one kind is one kind of the documentarist is a kind of documentary person that produces something new with the pieces and bits and pieces of something, right? Like that does some kind of alchemy to matter and changes it. Whereas the other is more a kind of archivist or storer of information or of document. And the second part of your question, what kind of game we're playing with this sound piece, I think a combination of both, like really a combination of both. we do a lot of alchemy, so to speak. And when I say we, honestly, it's not me, really. It's the sound guys that do most of that difficult work with sound. My two collaborators, Ricardo Giraldo and Leo Heiblum. And then, but we do a lot of also archiving, because we're also interested in recording and keeping the sound of the border as it is now.
Do you think that if you had chosen to write Lost Children Archive directly in Spanish, would you have ended up with a different story?
Damn, it's a difficult question. I would like to say no, because I have a feeling sometimes. You know how many people say that they feel different when they speak one language than the other, right? I don't feel that schizophrenic about language. I feel that I'm kind of the same person, but I may be wrong, which is the worst kind of thing. But you know, recently I had a very new kind of writing experience with bilingual issues, which is that I was trying to write this book that I'm writing about incarceration and detention, and I was trying to write it in English. My default was writing it in English, and I couldn't go beyond the first paragraph. Like something, I kept on like stopping and looking for numbers. How many people are incarcerated right now? Who are the exact corporations that are doing? I was looking for figures, I was looking for data, and I was getting lost in the data and not knowing how to transform that into something that takes you into a story. And then I said, okay, I'm going to try in Spanish. I don't know how I was able to have such a simple idea that had such good results. And I started in Spanish, and then I was able to step beyond some of the things that were being obstacles. And then I retranslated all that to English when I got stuck in Spanish. And then I was able to advance like 3 more paragraphs. And then I got stuck again. And so I've been playing this kind of relay game in the 2 languages. And this is the first book I'm writing that's really simultaneously bilingual, and that the 2 languages are mostly helping each other, or helping me when I am not helping me, I think. Yeah.
No more questions?
A cenar.
Valeria,
Thank you very much, everybody.
thank you so much, and I'm so sorry for inventing your life in North Korea. And I wish I could give you a PhD in dance.
I would love to have an honorary PhD in dance one
And
day.
thank you very much for being here with us, and thank you all. And Valeria is going to sign some books if you want. So over there in the garden.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.